Thrilled to have Karen Craigo with us tonight. I will read her formal introduction and then of course we'll get to know her. Karen Craigo is the Poet Laureate of the state of Missouri. She is also the editor of the Marshfield Mail newspaper in Marshfield, Missouri, as well as the author of the 2 poetry collections, Passing Through Humansville and No More Milk. She also has several chapbooks. Yes, perfect. And we have those in the shop and you can also order those online. She has also edited literary journals, including the Mid-American Review, and she has taught writing at several universities. She, I think, still has your blog, yes?
Yeah, I have 2 blogs now.
Wonderful. So awesome. Well, maybe share the other one. I have Better View of the Moon as your main blog, which you've been blogging on that for a while.
Yeah, that's true. I have one that I started as Poet Laureate that has a little less action on it so far, called Camp Mopo for Missouri Poetry, and it has a camping theme. So yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, Camp Mopo, which actually I was going to ask you about that, and like 4 questions down, so that's perfect. So we had kind of talked about you kicking off the evening with reading a poem.
Yes, I'd be glad to.
Great.
I have a little poem that I kind of like. Recently I've had a few losses. A really dear friend of mine who was my ex-husband and my mom both died recently. And I've been writing about grief. So I have a lot of poems about grief, which sounds like a real downer, but I don't know. I tried to take a different spin on the topic. This first poem is called The Customs of Grief, and it kind of plays with the word customs, like airport customs. So the customs of grief. Because I've spent some time there, someone asked me today about grief and its customs. I thought of it then as a line at the airport where you dare not sneak in the barbed, misshapen fruit of that country, nor its national dress made of ashes, nor its currency, which you carve from your own skin like an apple peel that you try to keep in one slice. I have a lot to declare. I've smuggled more than I can carry, though I know I'll be back many times, maybe take up residence by its salt sea, its anthem thick on my tongue.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
You know, it's so, I don't know, I think in a time where grief is so on our minds and it's so present in a communal way where normally I think grief is often private, that I think that resonates so deeply right now.
Yeah, I was feeling a lot with the stay-at-home order and worries about just my family and everybody I love. And my sister's a nurse in a COVID unit. She just got tested yesterday, and it's just very worrisome. And now we've got this this horrible incident that's happening in the news, and it's I grieve for our nation. And let me just say, as a state official, because as Poet Laureate, I suppose I am, and I might be the only one to acknowledge it, but Black Lives Matter and systemic violence by police needs to come to an end.
Yes, I completely agree. And it's overwhelming, the amount of grief that, and in all different spheres, that we're all experiencing. And I read an article recently by Esther Perel where she was talking about the different kinds of emotions. And one of the emotions that she talked about was anticipatory grief, where it's not necessarily happened yet, but you're expecting it to happen. And connecting that to Black Lives Matter and thinking about just the anticipatory grief that Black families have to live with every day, just leaving the house, and that feeling of fear and grief. Yeah, that phrase, anticipatory grief, was really enlightening for me to sort of define what was going on.
Yeah, just always waiting for that phone to ring, like what's going to happen to my child today. So
yes, yeah, and that takes a very heavy toll, physically, psychologically, emotionally.
Yeah.
So as you just mentioned, as Missouri Poet Laureate, You are a public figure. You represent all of the poets in Missouri.
Yeah.
So, can you maybe tell us a little bit about that? I wrote down when I was thinking about this and typing out my questions, I wrote, I can imagine this is a tricky time to be in a leadership role when maybe our traditional way as writers of, getting together is to gather physically, to have writing retreats and events. How has this kind of changed your feeling about being Missouri Poet Laureate?
It's kind of a bummer. The last AWP conference was like a lot of those panels and things didn't happen. So large amounts of things were canceled, and they're sort of just carrying those over to next year's AWP, which is in Missouri, my turf, during our bicentennial. And they're not accepting proposals. So, I was thinking of all the fun things we could have reading wise and just cool events. We were talking at the Missouri Arts Council about poetry on the buses and just different ways to highlight poetry. And it's like kind of up in the air what's going to happen with that. I had some camping things planned where we would have some writing about place-based poetry in a camping setting, and can't really pin down that sort of thing because social distancing phase 1 was just extended, and it's really hard to plan around a pandemic, which boo-hoo. I don't get to plan my poetry fun around people dying, which is ridiculous to even think about. But I am doing a thing in a couple weeks on Saturday that I'm calling Excavation Vacation. And it's just a chance for us to, it's like a little workshop where we can sort of find ways to write during this time and dredge up some of these feelings that we're dealing with and address them on the page.
I love that.
Thanks.
So to find out more information about that event, where could we go?
I can send you the info. I'm still pinning down a couple things about the format, but it's going to be, what day is that? The 12th? Is that a Friday? No, 13th, I think might be a Saturday. Something like that. Second Saturday.
Perfect.
So, but I'll let you know, and you can share it if you want.
I will yes, everyone, I will make sure to share all that information.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I didn't have this written down, but I'm curious now that you mention it. I know for me as a writer, I've had a very hard time being able to sit down and write. I think I've started 6 different things and that's just, I abandon it. I'm finding more comfort in reading right now. I've been just sort of inhaling books, but even then my attention span is not how it usually is. I'm curious, how have you kind of kept yourself writing throughout this time?
I really haven't written as much recently. I think usually I'm all over the place as a newspaper editor and just literary person who does lots of fun literary stuff. And I'm here, I'm there, and then I come home, and we've all come home from some other place. And for some reason that works for writing, but when we're all together and nobody's going anywhere, it's like, poetry usually lets me sort of settle in, be introspective, and think about my life and the stuff that's sort of bubbling under the surface. But right now it's like I can't enter that mode because I'm always kind of there a little bit. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense the way I said it, but I don't have my usual place to go. I think maybe because we're all on top of each other too.
That speaks to me a lot, especially as a parent.
Yeah.
We both have boys in similar age. It is definitely, life is at a different pace, a different rhythm. And I feel like, as an editor for a newspaper, your schedule is kind of all over. And so, that makes sense to me that the rhythm of where you would write or how you would get ideas would be changed.
Whatever it is, the rhythm of the day has changed, and I rely on those rhythms to sort of get to my writing place. So I've been it's more of a gathering time than a writing time, but I honor that. That's okay.
I love that. I actually was thinking about a craft talk that Mary Ruffel gave at River Pretty a couple years ago, where she compared it to sort of like seasons and how we think about a harvest, how there's a fallow period, and a fruiting period. And, that we as writers can honor our fallow periods and just know that, it's part of the process and that it's okay. I think writer's guilt is a heavy load. If you feel like you're not writing, you feel like you failed in some way or something.
Well, I taught composition for a few decades, and I always told my students that part of the process is thinking, just planning for the 3-page essay you're going to write for my class. But even if you're just sitting there on the couch, kind of mooning about it, then you're writing, kind of, just not with a implement.
That's exactly how I think about it. Yeah, and even reading too. I tell my students, like, reading is actively being in your writing process. And I always write so much better, like from an active reading session or when I'm really engaged in a book or, an essay or a poem or something. Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. Well, I feel less guilty now. Thank you. So you mentioned Camp Pomo, and I know your other project is including gathering poems from every county in the state of Missouri.
Yeah.
So how do you go about doing that? I'm so curious.
Well, I've met so many poets from all around, and everybody kind of knows somebody, and there are arts organizations all over the place. I was invited to read in the small town of Bell. It was canceled because of the pandemic, but it's this tiny little town that has 2 thriving bookstores and a couple reading series, and it's like, what? There's just poetry everywhere, and poetry is everywhere. Poetry survives in gulags, so why not in rural Missouri? Why not in the boot heel, right?
Yeah.
So there were just poets everywhere, and we're kind of hooked up to one another through things like this.
Are you noticing any sort of like through line images or subject matter, or are you like noticing any themes coming through, or is it all pretty eclectic?
I'd say it's pretty eclectic. Formally, it's what I'm seeing is I'm not seeing a lot of experimentation, but maybe they feel like it's a staid kind of project where I don't write that kind of thing. But I've had that problem with publications too. Like when I was editor of Mid-American Review, people thought Mid-American, that I'm not going to send my language poetry to Mid-American Review, but we would have loved to have seen language poetry. So, the project hasn't brought out a lot of experimental stuff, but I'm seeing diversity of voice, and I'm focusing a lot on place-based poetry, and I'm seeing diversity in place too, like poems that come out of urban area are different than what we might get out of Marshfield or whatever. So it's a satisfying mix, though. I'm enjoying it a lot. I have 2 projects. One is a website project where people from all over I'll print every county, post every county 1 poem. And if I can't get a poem from there, I'll go find a poem somehow. I'll run over to that county and beat it out of them or whatever. But
I love that.
yeah, we're gonna travel and find the poetry because it's there. Yeah. And we're also doing an anthology, which is different than the county project. So it's just Missouri poets with their place-based work.
Okay. Oh, that's okay. So there are 2 books.
Well, one's just a website project, and the other is a book. Yeah.
How cool. Yeah. Can people submit to these, or are you kind of curating it? Okay. Yeah,
they sure can. I'm actively seeking that. And my email address is KarenCraigo@gmail. So I usually put a dot in there. You know, the dots don't really matter in a Gmail address.
I totally thought
it's actually Karen.Craigo. Yeah, you can leave that out though if you want.
I didn't know that the dots didn't count. That's good to know. So I'm curious, when thinking about place or thinking about, like your reading practice or how you sort of entered into poetry. I'm curious, and I tried to ask you this Wednesday when it was the sound was all messed up. But I'm always so curious to know about an author's like early influences in terms of books and authors. And then maybe like a poet that you have come across recently that is exciting you, or a book that is exciting you. I'm wondering, like, what are you reading now?
I was doing, Mike has this, my husband, Mike Chisniewski, has this Story 366 project. Every leap year, he does a daily book review. And I got through a couple months of that with poetry and then stopped. So I was reading just kind of everything. And within the last 2 years, he doesn't have that requirement, but my books that I was reviewing were all within the last few years. So I was just going all over the place. And that's frequently my reading habit, just to read journals and anthologies and things online and just get like wide smattering. There are some people I keep coming back to. I love Ada Limon. I love Jericho Brown.
Yes, who just won the Pulitzer.
Yeah.
I love tradition. I actually got to meet him a couple summers ago at Sewanee. It was, what a nice, lovely person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Missouri poets, Carl Phillips is an enduring favorite of mine. He's in St. Louis. I love a few strange standout poets that I really love. My friends in college, way back when, really got into Robert Creeley. That was kind of my gateway drug. And we had this anthology that my friend George had, and we would always have these big bonfires, and we'd pass around the Robert Creeley book, and we'd memorize poems, and we'd say, just say a poem out loud, and it was a point of pride to have a new poem memorized. And then we went on this crazy trip once, about 5 of us, to Ohio. We were in school in Kentucky, and we went to where Robert Creeley was reading at Ohio University, and we took this like crazy looking book that was like in several parts that George had nicely taped together and made look really pretty. We handed it to him. One book for 5 people. We're like, sign our book.
Wow.
And he was so totally flattered, but he was like our God. But
that is so cool. I bet he remembers that. What was so striking about his poetry? Like, what do you think hooked you on it?
It's so expressive. Do you know his poem, The Rain? It goes,
no.
All night the sound had come back again, and again falls this quiet, persistent rain. What am I to myself that must be remembered, insisted upon so often? Is it the ease or even the hardness of rain falling? I can't quite remember the rest, but it ends with the line, be wet with a decent happiness. And I just love that sort of like physical musicality, and I don't know, it really spoke to me. But what I think got me into poetry was that communal aspect of coming together. There was even a fire, right? We were just like cave people, but it was so elemental, and it got me hooked. Yeah.
Well, sold. I love it. I love it already. I'm going to Google that immediately as soon as we get off here. Well, that's so great. So we had kind of talked about some topics that have been on your mind lately. And when we were messaging back and forth about what we might talk about, you had mentioned that you've been really thinking about candor and its relationship to like rhetorics and poetry, and maybe sort of like linguistic aspects of language. I'm so intrigued by that idea. And especially this idea of maybe what you mean by candor. Like, I'd love to hear you talk about that more.
Well, I write an awful lot about my life, about motherhood, and like my book, No More Milk, is literally about like breastfeeding and after, and it's also about like trying to afford a gallon of milk and raiding the kids' piggy bank to get and it's, I suppose you might call it confessional or something like that. It seems like a dated term to me, but I'm unabashedly writing about my life, but not, it's not just a diary entry, because there's art at work too, and it looks like we're candor that's honest and open.
Oh, we're paused. Karen might need to re-enter the session. Oh, while we have kind of this moment of pause, I was going to invite anybody who wants to ask a question in the session can go down. If you go to the bottom of your screen in the webinar, you can click on Q&A, and you should be able to tap into that chat box. And if you have a question for Karen, I can go ahead and share that with her when she hops back on, and have her answer that questions. This might be a great time to sort of be thinking about what you might like to ask, or if you have any questions about our upcoming events, I can hold those and then answer those sort of later on in the evening. And hopefully we'll get her back. You guys aren't here to see me. Oh, I'm looking at the participants. Hello, everybody. It's so good to see all your names. I really hope that a lot of you think about participating in our open mic coming up a week from tonight. And again, you know, because it's going to be on a Zoom webinar, much like this, you will be able to, you know, participate from your home. So you don't have to be here in Springfield to join in on that event. So please feel free to share. And also that is not limited to poetry, of course. So if you want to share an essay, or if you want to share a section of a short story or a flash piece, a prose poem, or even a song, if you want to share that, completely welcome. Okay. I'm not seeing any questions pop up just yet. Kind of wait for Karen to come back. Hopefully she can rejoin. Oh, someone asked a question. Okay, perfect. From Steve. Okay, so as soon as she gets on, Steve, I will have her answer that. And for those watching on Facebook Live, Steve, I'm just going to share your question because I think it's a great one. He was saying that Karen mentioned getting into her writing place, and what does that mean? He sort of wondering, like, how do you get into a writing place? What does that mean to be in a writing place? I think, oh, okay. I can add that one on there. Can you give me a pen, honey? Can you maybe message Karen and see if she's okay? Okay, and John mentioned, John King asked a question on Facebook Live about if she's ever nervous about nature imagery. Okay, John, I'm writing that down. These are really good questions. Thank you. Huh, James, I did get your question. Maybe someone else wants to answer that. Oh, there. We'll have Karen answer it. It's very existential. When is a door a door? Hi. Okay, she's connecting to audio. Hey, you're back. Oh, I think you're muted.
There we go.
There you go. Well,
Hi,
actually, it was great because 3 questions came in while you were gone. So if you wanted to answer those, the first comes from Steve, and Steve asked, you mentioned getting into your writing place, and
yeah.
Would you share more about how you get to your writing place?
Well, I actually have a daily meditation habit that helps me get into that mindset. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah, I can.
This is even better, I think. But you know what? Sometimes the meditation competes with the writing because it's like I go to that place for a different purpose and sort of use that part of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
What I really need is some stillness and some time just to be by myself. And I don't think I've been by myself since 1973 or, well, it's been a few weeks anyway. So,
Yeah.
But just got to sit down, and it's not that mystical for me. My theory about writer's block and inspiration is that you just have to be ready. You just have to keep your pen moving, and the worst crap might come out of it, but at least it's something you can move around and fix and cut and edit, and something is there. And when nothing is there, you have nothing to fix. So I actually put a lot of stock in just sitting down and writing. So nothing.
Just like letting it out and not worrying about, is this going to be something, just letting it just sort of be the practice itself.
Yeah. I used to do a thing when I started a poem that I would like write, and it was so stupid, and I would like go back and just obliterate it, completely cross it out because I was embarrassed by it. And now I just let the stupid happen, and it's the best thing. Give yourself permission to be stupid, and you might come up with something that's so stupid it's brilliant. And it might just be stupid, but you got to figure that out later.
Yes, Anne Lamott calls those shitty first drafts, right? Like, just
Right.
don't worry about it. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and then it becomes less precious, like the writing. It becomes just how we maybe think about like practicing music. It's just part of your rhythm. That's wonderful. Okay, I'm gonna ask another question from John King. He asks, are you ever nervous about using nature imagery in poems?
I've gotten it wrong and published it wrong before. I had a poem about bees where I had them like something really stupid where I had them gathering nectar and they gather pollen or something like that. That was real basic, but I don't know. I can't be too embarrassed when I make an error because I make them daily, and hopefully an editor will keep it from getting into print. But it is accuracy comes to mind as a challenge with nature. And also there's the matter of nature being, nature poems are automatically elegies these days with global climate change and all the just all the environmental problems that we have. So bums me out more than makes me nervous. I'm curious why he would ask that. Ask him why.
Okay.
Does it make him nervous?
Can you ask him? Ask John.
Because I'll bet there's something really interesting there.
Yeah, I'm curious too. I always love to hear John's questions. He always asks great ones. While we're waiting for John to like elaborate on that,
Yes.
I have a question from Kathy Davis. How do journalism and poetry inform your work? They seem so different.
Well, I don't know if they're different. I wrote once a fan letter to a poem named William Matthews. He's now deceased, but he had a favorite book of mine called Flood. And I wrote to him. This book was so important. I wrote him this fan letter kind of. And he wrote back to me a little postcard, and he said, I was a journalist then too in Ohio, long years and years ago. But he said, a reporter is to a small town what a poet is to the language. And I love that. It's just something he only said to me, and it's like, it should be published because it's so great. But I think it's all about getting the news. And it's the Marshfield community news, the Webster County news is what I try to get for the newspaper. It's kind of the news of my spirit that I try to get in me. Sometimes it's very interesting breaking news in my spirit. So it's, I'll tell you this though, when I was teaching, I always taught the first year classes with like 25 comp students and maybe 4 or 5 classes, and I'd have them write like 3 drafts of each of 5 papers, and you do the math, that's like 1,500 papers a term.
I try not to do the math.
Yeah, I was told there would be no math.
Yeah.
I have much more time. You wouldn't think this for a journalist who's one of only like 3 journalists in my organization. So the whole newspaper, there's 3 of us who put it out. But I don't give it all at the office the way I did with students. You'd always be thinking about your students and wanting to, like, every student is her own case study. And if they learn this, then they can be challenged to learn this next thing, and it never stops. But I can cover an alderman meeting and it stops.
Yeah.
It's over, and I write it up for the paper. So they're very similar in that sort of reporting what seems elemental and that people desperately need to know. But
well, and I love that you said that, like, the breaking news of your spirit. And
yeah.
I think that's so interesting. And I reread No More Milk before our interview on Wednesday, and it really does, like, capture a certain urgency of, like, young motherhood, and, like you said, like, gathering it's like milk from your body and gathering the pennies and the quarters to buy milk, and the body, all the different sort of, like, celebrations of these different parts of the body, which are so interesting and moving. And then with Passing Through Humansville, you kind of move into more place-based writing. And I thought it was really funny in your interview with the Missouri Review, where she sort of asked, like, is Humansville a real town in Missouri? And it's like, yes. So, and you mentioned that, I think we cut out just as you were kind of answering that question about candor and you know, what that means to you. And maybe you were talking about how maybe the breaking news of your spirit right now, you shared with us a poem about making bread during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And this idea of grief and anticipatory grief. Yeah, maybe we could come back to what you were going to say about candor.
Well, I've just been reconsidering it. It was kind of complicated, that thought. It was a weird one, and I wasn't sure I got it out properly, but it was like kind of a mess. But it occurs to me that candor is art. It's artifice. It's artificial. Candor is a rhetorical device that's on par with it's hard to recapture lightning in a bottle, but it's you write poems like mine that are apparently very straightforward, and they're not that straightforward. They're art, and they're artifice, and it's rhetoric. Each little poem is an argument. Every poem's an argument that tries to make a case for whatever it's saying, and this apparent candor is a mask, kind of. And I felt this during the pandemic, during the stay-at-home order, when there are no masks here. We're all, like, stepping in each other's, like, dirty clothes on the floor. It's like, it's not that bad, but we're very real with one another. And I realized that what's real is different than candor, different than the writing that supposedly is candorous, is honest. And it's kind of led me to thinking about honesty in a new way. So
that's so interesting. Like, and I'm thinking about, like, in essays, when Vivian Gornick talks about how a persona can actually allow us to be more candid. It seems sort of like counterintuitive, but it actually is a way, like, stepping into those rhetorical devices is actually a way to get more open. Because it just kind of allows that tiny step of, like, distancing.
Right. Yeah.
Where you can maybe be more open or honest. And I think she calls it, like, detached and detached and stylized and generous. And I can see what you mean by that idea of, like, it feels like it's an artifice. It's, you know, persona in a poem or an essay is something you choose artistically, but it gets at maybe that, like, deeper level of meaning.
And it's always hit or miss anyway with language. And this is what we were talking about sort of by text before with our talk about Saussure, that words can only go so far. My idea of a tree is not, I'm thinking of a pine and you're thinking of an elm, and I say tree and we think we're communicating, but we're really not. Robert Hass said word is elegy to what it signifies, and that's true. It's the it's kind of gone the minute it leaves your pen, and it kind of belongs to the reader. And I think that's kind of tied into this notion too, that it's really nearly impossible, even if you want to be a poet who sounds very honest and generous and forthright, it's impossible. The distance between what's in my mind and spirit and what's in the reader's experience that lets them accept it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting leap to think about that. I mean, do you have the reader, are you like really aware of a reader's experience when you're writing, or does that come more in revision? Or when do you kind of anticipate that sort of receipt of your poem?
It's the opposite of composition, that if you think too much about the writer or the reader, you're kind of doomed. And that's the key to writing a great essay for a class, is like knowing what the instructor expects and knowing what a reader would find interesting. But if you get too much into your head with that stuff while you're approaching the page for a poem, you're doomed. You're just going to write people-pleasing poems. And speaking of what you were talking about before with persona, when I was younger, I always wrote the really personal stuff in second person, like in Degrees of Grey and Phillipsburg, that famous poem. You might come here Sunday on a whim. Say your life broke down. The last good kiss you had was years ago. It's you, but it's him. Yeah. And that my personal stuff used to be you, but now
yeah, it reminds me of Carmen Maria Machado's new memoir, In the Dream House, where when she's writing about that time where she was in an abusive relationship, she moves into the second person, and then her now voice is in the first person. And it's such an amazing choice and an empowering choice. And she interrogates her choice of doing that within the memoir too, which is really interesting. Okay, I'm going to move to some more questions.
I'm glad we have questions. That's exciting.
Yeah. Sarah Freelay asks, hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Can you talk a little bit about your tenure as Poet Laureate and the particular challenges presented by the pandemic? We kind of touched on that at the beginning, but I would love to hear more about that if that's not pivoting too much.
Well, my requirement is really, I think my official requirement is that I write a poem during my term for Missouri. That's all I have to do. And I can do that, but started to write one about the Super Bowl victory. It seemed like a fun, but then it was like, what am I going to write about that? And then, so that's all I have to do. And I'm sort of representing and promoting poetry in the state. And that's pretty vague and nebulous, but I had plans, and the pandemic has made them less likely to come to fruition. So I'm kind of thinking on my feet right now, trying to think of ways to make some fun that's distant, and some I mentioned before, my excavation vacation, which is a workshop where we're gonna come up with like poetry starts during this like strange time that we're in. That's happening. What was I gonna say about that? I forget what I was gonna say about that, but stuff like that. I'm gonna do some online workshops and just shift on the fly, not do as much.
Love that. Yeah, well, and it kind of reminds me, I was listening to a podcast with Joy Harjo. I don't know if you caught that, Sarah. It's so good, but where she was talking about like uniquely being the Poet Laureate of the United States right now during this pandemic, and sort of what it means to her. And she said so many brilliant things in the way that only Joy Harjo can say them, but she was talking about like how it's sort of a unique time, and people are reporting that they're reading poetry more. There have been a lot of articles about how poetry is sort of the genre of choice right now, that a lot more people are finding comfort in poetry and more people are writing poetry now. And so, I think it's kind of a, like you said, like an opportunity where you can sort of think, Yeah, I mean, but I can't imagine how disappointing, especially with all of the events at AWP with the bicentennial. I'm excited about your excavation project.
Yeah, that should be a lot of fun. And it's just intended to help people do what I need to do, you know, from teaching, that sometimes when you teach, it's because you need to hear what it is you're teaching.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
That's what I'm
yes.
doing with this. Trying to dredge up some poems from all this.
I love that. We have another question. Steve Yates asks, do you meet new subject matter for poems while you are working as a reporter? Do you mind that material?
I do, actually. I have a poem. Let me see if I can pull it up here about an item. I have this social calendar where it's like the AA meeting is tonight and the quilters group meets tomorrow. But I wrote one about the nudists of like this region. Let me see. I'm pulling it up. The Southwest Missouri nudists sent an item to the Marshfield Mail, and it was about a meet and greet that they were having at the Battlefield Mall, which is here in Springfield. And they were just meeting in the food court, these nudists, and fully clothed, of course, but like I wrote this little poem about that called Calendar of Events, Southwest Missouri Nudists. The nudists meet the second Sunday in the food court of the nearest mall. They want to notice in the calendar with the senior walkers, the quilting circle, AA. I'm happy to oblige, maybe give the quilters a jolt. I like to picture them, their sly smiles over cashew chicken, hot pretzels, so naked under all those clothes.
Oh,
they just set my imagination running.
That's so perfect. Yeah. I can imagine that, you know, like you said, I mean, that quote that you mentioned earlier about sort of who a reporter is to a small town. And yeah, that meets that so beautifully. James Bryant. Hi, James. Thank you so much for all your technical support.
James is
so
awesome.
Appreciated. James is amazing.
You guys need to check out SPOFest. James's organization has a good Facebook presence, SPOFest, and he's got events that he has every Saturday. So check him out.
Maybe I'll do like a post meeting kind of Facebook post where I just sort of share all this information about links and maybe the different things that we're talking about and the different writers that we've been talking about, so people can check those out. And James, I would love to like link to your group. He asks, you mentioned recently that you were thinking of writing a novel. How is that going?
That is just in my head right now. I usually write shorter things, and I always do National Novel Writing Month, and I'm just terrible. I never finish or anything, but I actually have an idea. And I don't know if you guys have this experience, but when ideas are very nascent and very like just this fetal kind of thing, I can't talk about it or I kill it. I know people who do talk about it, and they talk and talk and talk about all their characters and what they're going to do and their arc. And it's like, well, why are you going to write this now? It's out. Yeah. It's out of your body. It lives in your body until it hits the page.
I can feel that. Hold that close. Coop is like furiously scribbling down comments from Facebook Live. He's finishing those up. I was going to ask you, I was so intrigued by the poem that you shared the other night, and I wondered if you would read it again. Your poem about making bread.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, there's been a lot of essays about bread making, and as a bookseller, I can tell you that I have seen more orders for bread making books, and they're sold out. Like some of our customers who've tried to buy sourdough, you know, specifically like sourdough making books, they're like impossible to find. I feel so terrible. I have to email them back and be like, we're not going to get them in until June.
We all need more Amish friends. They can tell us sourdough.
Yes. So I think, yeah, for sure, thinking about this sort of phenomenon of bread making is a really interesting topic to write about.
Yeah. It's I tried it. I tried to make the sourdough starter, and a little unfaithful to things like that. So it would go an extra day and I'd try to feed it and it got a little stinky and got a little yellow. So I threw it away. But as I said the other night, it's for a poet, it's less about making sourdough than about plumbing the depths of making sourdough so you can write about making sourdough.
I love it. Yeah.
So here's that poem. In 2020, we made sourdough. That was the year we all made bread. It's not that there was a shortage, that we were meeting a need, but something made us pull out our bread machines, our rolling pins, those bags of flour, hard to find because all of us were doing some variant of the same thing. Just a minute ago, I fed my starter, stirred in a bit more water and flour. It works like the book said it would. Each day I find it bubbly and alive, smelling more like yeast. I can't help feeling I conjured that life from nothing, but it wasn't me. It's a fungus, always present in the air we breathe, and it found what I left for it, and then it multiplied and kept on, a kind of grace you can slice, then toast, then butter. It's my sourdough poem.
And immediately hungry.
I know, me too. I like the idea that there's these minuscule life forms all around us, and that's what sourdough starter is. It just pulls in the natural yeast instead of us going to the store and buying yeast, and that just fired my imagination. Of course, I guess coronavirus is out there too, but but there's some good things floating in the air.
Yes. Oh, and we have to focus on those. My MFA program we have a great sort of like Facebook group, and someone asked the other day, she was teaching a lesson and she was calling for food poetry. And now I might go in, you haven't published this one, so I can't share it, but have you yet?
No, but it's
okay.
Fair game. You're welcome to share it if you want to.
Well, but it was so neat to sort of see all the different food poems, that people were recommending, and from classics to like contemporary, and I don't know, there's just something so appealing about poems about food. I think just because it's so sensory.
Yeah, I was on a little webinar with my friend Amy Nizuka-Matatil the other day.
Oh, I was about to bring her up. I'm so excited for her new book. Yeah,
she's wonderful.
Yeah,
but she was talking about the same thing we've been talking about, that it's a little hard to create great literature right now when you're just piled on top of each other. But she promoted the idea of making bread, like painting, drawing a picture, just doing anything, planting a garden, whatever you can do to express yourself, because that's sort of like keeping yourself, I guess, nimble. Those words were going together for me, so I was like, nimble.
I feel it. Yes. What she came to mind when you were talking about accuracy and writing about nature, because she's just one of my favorite nature poets. And John, you might check her out, because I bet she would inspire you and like give you permission to write about nature and just not feel embarrassed about it.
Plus it's like endless. There's so much.
Yeah. And I think that's like giving ourselves permission to be artists holistically,
I wrote an epithalamion poem for her wedding with our friend Dustin. So I was in her wedding and read a poem, and it was just really great. And it was called Naming What Is, and it was about Adam and Eve in the garden giving names to all the animals. And that seems even more appropriate now, since she's written so many brilliant books of nature poetry.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I'm totally fangirling about her. We have another question from the webinar from Lindsay. She says, "Hi, Karen. What encouragement would you give someone who daydreams of writing but finds herself distracted by all the things?" Feel you.
That would be the same advice I would need to give myself.
Yes.
And I don't know. Actually, I do know, and I always preach this for writers, because I kind of don't believe, it's a risky thing to say, but I kind of don't believe in writer's block. And I always say that the solution is butt work. You have a block on good writing maybe, but writing is, if you're able to write, you're cognitively able to write, it will come. And if you sit down and do it, it might be, I said something like this before, it might be a total mess, but you have some starting point there. So I think anybody who's sort of like daydreaming, thinking about writing, wants to give it a try, maybe has that internal editor that they think, well, this is no good. Well, maybe it's no good. Who cares if it's no good? It's you, it's your spirit, write about it, see what comes out, and you might end up, you will probably, not even probably, you will end up with something you're proud of if you keep at it long enough, right? Million Monkeys and Typewriters and King Lear or something, but you will end up writing something that has a little gasp of promise, and you can take off from there. So it really is a matter of sitting down on your butt and moving your hands. I do it with the pen because I like that mind-body connection where it's just comes right down the vein of my arm onto the page, it feels like. But that's, everybody's got their own way, but you just have to do it and give up the idea that you're no good, because none of us are any good and all of us are perfect. So
Oh, so yes, so true. Yeah, Ellen Bass gave a lecture about how she writes with a pen, and all of her first drafts are, a paper, and she was very generous and handed out sort of some, like a process of a draft of a full poem from her first scribbles in her notebook as she's looking over the ocean in Santa Cruz where she lives. And you can see like kind of what you're talking about with that mind-body connection. She just, every line is sort of urgently scribbled, then she'll cross some things out, and then she'll repeat a line. It's like she's sort of feeling it out, like, do I want that line? Yes, I do. And then kind of goes from there. And it's so neat to see. We don't really ever get to see that process. Usually when we are reading poetry, maybe we're picking up a book and it's like that poet's best work. We don't ever get to see the lines that got crossed out. So it almost, when we read, it's like a false sense of just this spontaneous brilliance. And it was such a gift for me to just see that progress over all those pages and sort of look at, oh, she's a human person who can't spell her first time around, because she's at the beach, just kind of feeling out her ideas. I love that.
It's a contemplative process. And I mentioned that I meditate, but my real meditation is like where I have the most discipline. It's my poetry. I go deep in and like deal with stuff. It doesn't quite give me what I'm after from my practice, but it's you can't really go wrong with it. Because I mentioned this maybe before too, but I had a professor who always would say there are two kinds of poetry: good poetry and great poetry, because the act of writing a poem is ennobling. It's like the best part of you and the best thing you can do. So I would highly recommend it.
I love that. Another question just popped up, so I'm going to read it. This is from Amy Volmer. Do you let your poems simmer for a while before you revise?
No, actually, my poems are all pretty short, which is something I'm trying to bust out of maybe. Anytime you have a habit as a writer, you want to bust out of it because you think it's wrong or something, or your poems are boring. And I fall into that too. I'm trying to sort of go long instead of writing these little sonnet-sized poems that I usually write. But because they're short, I can work them through in a session. I revise in my head, and because I've been writing for such a darn long time, I can sort of like straighten it out up here before it hits the page, and then it hits the page, and then I hit the computer and see how the line lengths are stacking up and see what the shape of the poem is, and I can enhance. And I'm done then. I might have, if it's going to be published, an editor might have a thought on it, and there's some things I might want to draw out or get rid of for continuity in a book or something like that. But my poems are products of a long time on the page, right? I just work it out in a sitting, and I don't come back to them. I might be a better poet if I did, but that's what I do.
I'm curious because you also are an essayist, and I wonder, is your revision experience different with essays than with poems?
I think I write stories too, and I think they all, the longer they are, the more I have to sort of sit and look and make sure it's making sense. But they are sort of all products of a particular point in time. Yeah. And I don't write anything very long, so I can do it that way. And I can revisit it and look at it again, maybe the next day, go through and see if it's setting up the way I want it to, and maybe decide if it's working or not. But it's not something that this sounds scandalous, but I don't put a lot of, I don't come back and slave over it all the time. So, because they're short, you don't have to, something that's short.
That I like that you say that, because I mean, I think so often we hear so much about revision. It's interesting to hear like different people's approaches to revision. I think Taylor was talking about maybe doing her craft talk next Wednesday here on revision. And like different ways to maybe think about that process. Or I mean, when a piece, because you can't overwork something. I think we've all been there where we've overworked it until it's dead, you know.
And in the same way, you might give up on something too soon because it's like, oh, this isn't any good. And maybe it just requires a revision, but I'll just trash it and start the next thing. So. Right.
I know. I wish if we had the magical formula, it would be pretty awesome.
I will say, as I'm getting older and I'm more just settled in my artistic life, I kind of love the way I do it. And it just makes me really happy to create the way I create. And I like to experiment, but I'm starting to feel really comfortable in my body and my writing and my mind and my brain and my spirit. And I just really love what comes out of that.
I love that. What do you feel like has kind of been that turning point, like to get to that comfortable place, or that place of feeling really just empowered?
I don't know. It's the same part of me that doesn't have to win every argument anymore, and it wants shoes that feel good instead of ones that hurt, right? It's just like, this is me and my body and my mind and my spirit, and it's good. It's a good thing. I'm a perfect reflection of the creator, and I'm perfect. It's certainly you won't hear me singing that saved a wretch like me. That will never come out of my mouth. I'm perfect, and it's so, I see it and I feel it and I embody it and I love it, and I wish everybody knew how perfect they were. I can still write perfect crap too, and it's a mess, and I have to trash it because it's so bad, or obliterate it because I can't stand for anybody to see it. But that's part of my perfect self.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Lynette Cadle. Hi, Lynette. Hi, everybody. This is so fun. We're right at 8:00, so this might actually be a perfect question to end our session. She is asking, can you give us a writing prompt to take with us tonight or for in the morning?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. One of my enduring favorite prompts for any kind of writing is probably one you've encountered before, but it's great all the time if you're just not sure where to go. When you're not sure what to write about, sometimes you sit down at your page and you go into that same well and draw up the same stuff, and it's not that fresh. But here's a prompt that nothing super new for me, but it's one that you might try. I like to turn on TV and flip around. Kind of a couple ways you can do this, but I like to listen for the perfect first line. And this is for any genre, right? I wrote a poem once called The Museum of Things You Can't Fix. And I got the first line from a news program. And it was a person who was collecting potato chips shaped like famous people. And the reporter started and they were holding up like the Nixon potato chip. But the reporter said, it's not your typical museum. And then they took off talking about the potato chip museum. Yeah. But mine, I wrote that down. True, it's not your typical museum. comma, and then what comes next? So I made mine about the museum of things you can't fix. And it was all about like the word I misspelled at the spelling bee and the relationship that went south and those kinds of things. So eavesdrop a little. You might not be able to get out to a diner, but you can flip around on TV or radio, social media, whatever, and just find a sentence and take it in a totally different direction. That's my best prompt for right now off the top of my head.
I love it. I think that's a perfect prompt. And yeah, isn't that interesting? We can't really go eavesdropping on people the way we might like to anymore. Yeah. But the radio
really has to fall over this whole writing process.
Yeah, it's just we have to get a little more creative. Absolutely.
Right.
Well, I'm wondering, Karen, if you maybe wanted to read just one more poem before we part, or do you have any kind of like last things you were thinking of that I didn't think to ask?
Well, I would like to read one last poem, but not mine. I want to read a poem for our, might have a problem finding this again.
Lynette did follow up and she said, a prompt that requires me to watch TV. Thank you, Karen.
Anything for you, Lynette. One of my favorite writing buddies. Okay, I think I had this wonderful Jericho Brown poem I wanted to read.
Oh.
But my computer's giving me a hard time right now. So I'll just read one by Karen Craigo.
Okay, perfect.
I hear she's really good. Hold on one second. I'm gonna get rid of my nudist here. It's all on my screen. Just something else in the grief mode. My working title for my manuscript is X and What Comes After. And of course, what comes after is why. So it's all about loss and that kind of thing. So this is a poem about when you're grieving. Let me read two quick poems because they're short. This first one is called Grief. Don't worry, I still move through the world. At first I doubted I could stir, could raise myself up on an elbow to sip a bit of broth. But I'm fine. I go to the store, read the back of the cereal box, notice each time the furnace kicks on. What I mean is, I take things in. Just today I saw where some species of bat hibernate through the cold, but others migrate. That's right. You figure you're looking at birds in flight, but they're so much darker, so much more upside down. And by the way, a question we had before about writing about nature, the fact that some bats migrate, that's like all I did with that. Just nature sort of is a little natural fact and it stuck in my head and I just, of course, filtered it through me, which is what, like, that's the job description for being a poet. But that's part of the answer to that. You just don't work it too hard. I'm not Amy Nizuka Matatil, so that's all I know about bats. It's in a line and it's really about me. And here's my last one tonight. This one's about when you are grieving someone and then you forget to grieve them and then you feel really guilty because you feel like you've cheated on them or something. Sunday, I forgot I missed you. Sometimes grief is nothing much. It's the knock you pretend not to hear as you keep puttering, the kettle you just as soon ignore for as long as you can until you can't. It's keening, it's hot, it scrapes your ears. I've tried to lose the loss of you, but it seems to have dug in like a tumor or a tick. I haven't thought of you in days, and there are days not thinking of you is the only thing I can think about. These poems sort of seem like mired in this time that we're all in together, and I just send all of you so much just love and good wishes for your writing and your reading, and that it sort of bolsters your spirit, even if it's in a downer kind of way, like my poems, but something that just sort of like when you write it or you read it, you just feel like seen in the world. And, so
well, it lets us know we're not alone in those feelings, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That
Karen, Thank you so much for doing this and for being like such an amazing sport after Wednesday. And thank you for everyone else who came back.
I have a feeling the problem was on my end, so.
Oh no.
So,
Well, it inspired me to sort of figure out this other solution. So I think this is going to be great moving forward. So thank
really
you
good.
for sharing your work and your ideas and your inspiration. And
Thank you.
I so appreciate it. And then everybody who's watching, I will sort of collect some of those links from Karen and make a post sort of about like where you can find some of her work with the Missouri Poet Laureate projects. And maybe anything else you wanted to share, Karen, like maybe some of those writers that you mentioned earlier.
Great, I'll make a
That
list.
would be awesome. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
I so appreciate it. This was so fun, and I hope to see everybody next Wednesday for Taylor Larson too. So, but this was you were just the perfect person to kick us off. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. Let me be sure to say thanks to Coop, who was wonderful in the background making things work. Thank you so much.
Yes, he's in the corner. Thank you, Karen. And yeah, happy writing and reading to everybody. And yeah, please take care and stay safe.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.